Welcome back to Dr. Finance. This is a paper written by Sir Arthur Lewis, who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1979. This is his paper in 1954. He's famous for the concept called the Lewis turning point. So let's go. This is the third part. We have said very little so far about the activities of government, since our basic model uses only capitalists, their employees, and subsistence producers. Governments affect the process of capital accumulation in many ways, however, and not least by the inflations into which they run. Many governments in backward countries are also currently anxious to use surplus manpower for capital formation. And as there is a great deal that can be done with labor and a few tools, roads, irrigation, river walls, schools, and so on, it is useful to say something on the subject. We shall therefore in this section analyze the effect of inflation-financed government formation of capital, and thereby also give ourselves the chance to recapitulate the analysis of the previous section. The results, it will be remembered, lie within two extremes. At one extreme, all the money spent by the government comes back to it in taxes. And this is accepted by all classes. In this case, prices rise very little. At the other extreme, all classes refuse to accept a redistribution between themselves and the government. In this case, prices tend to rise continuously, except that rising output as a result of the capital formed sooner or later catches up with prices and brings them down again. Rising output will also increase the government's normal share of the national income, and all monetary pressure will cease when the normal share has risen to the level of the inflated share which it was trying to get. These results give us the questions we must ask. 1. What part of marginal income returns automatically to the government? 2. What effect does inflation have upon the various classes? And 3. What effect was government capital formation upon output? One other point must be remembered. In all these analyses so far, we have assumed a closed economy. In an open economy, inflation plays havoc with the balance of payments. We have therefore to assume that the government has strict control over foreign transactions. This assumption holds for some backward economies. Others would get into an awful mess if they launched upon inflationary finance. It is not possible that all the money spent by the government should come back to it in the first round, since this would presume that the government took 100% of marginal income. If the government takes any part of marginal income, some of the money will come back to it. But even the Keynesian multiplier will not bring it all back unless taxation is the only leakage, i.e. there is no saving. The larger the government's share of marginal incomes, the more it will get back, the quicker it will get it, and the smaller will be the effect on prices. Since the Second World War, a number of governments of modern industrial states seem to be taking around 40 to 50% of marginal incomes in taxation. And this is one of the major reasons why their price levels have not risen more despite heavy pressure on resources for capital formation, defense, etc. In backward countries, however, governments take only a very small part of marginal incomes. The best placed governments from this point of view are those in countries where output is concentrated in a few large units, mines, plantations, and therefore easily taxed, or where foreign trade is a large part of the national income and is thus easily reached by import and export duties. One of the worst off is India, with a large part of its output produced by subsistence producers and small-scale units, hard to reach, and with less than 10% of national income passing in foreign trade. In many cases, marginal taxation is less than average taxation, for when money incomes rise, the government continues to charge the same prices for railway travel or for stamps and hesitates to raise land taxes on the peasants, with the result that money incomes rise faster than government receipts. No government should consider deficits financing without assuring itself that a large part of increases in money income will automatically come back to itself. By contrast, the USSR, with its very high rate of turnover tax, automatically mops up surplus funds injected into the system before they are able to generate much demand and inflation via the multiplier process. The next question is the effect of inflation upon the distribution of income. The surplus money raises prices, some more than others. The government will probably try to prevent prices from rising, but will succeed better with some than with others. It is easy to apply price control to large-scale enterprises, but very hard to prevent the farmers from raising food prices or the petty traders from making big margins. From the point of view of capital formation, the best thing that can happen is for the surplus money to roll into the pockets of people who will reinvest in productivity. The merchant classes would probably use it mainly for speculation in those commodities that are getting scarce. The middle classes would mainly buy big American cars with it, or go on trips to Europe, wangling the foreign exchange somehow. The peasants ought to use it to improve their farms, but probably most would use it only to pay off debt or to buy more land. There is really only the one class that is pretty certain to reinvest its profits productively, and that is the class of industrialists. The effects of an inflation on secondary capital formation therefore depends first on how large the industrial class is, and secondly on whether the benefit goes largely to this class. In countries which have only a small industrial class, inflation leads mainly to speculation in commodities and in land, and to the hoarding of foreign exchange. But in any country which has a substantial industrialist class with the passion this class has for ruling over bigger and better factories, even the most frightening inflations, e.g. Germany from 1919, leave behind a substantial increase in capital formation. Have we hit here upon some deep psychological instinct which drives the industrialist to use his wealth more creatively than others? Probably not. It is just that his job is of the kind where passion for success results in capital formation. The peasant farmer wants to have more land, not more capital on his land, unless he is a modern capitalist farmer. So his passion is dissipated merely in changes in the price and distribution of land. The merchant wants to have a wider margin or a quicker turnover neither of which increases fixed capital. The banker wants more deposits. Only the industrialist's passion drives towards using profits to create a bigger empire of bricks and steel. It follows that it is in industrial communities that inflations are most helpful to capital formation, whereas in countries where the industrial class is negligible, there is nothing to show for the inflation when it is over except the original investment, which started it off. We should also note that many governments do not like the fact that inflation enables industrialists to earn the extra profits with which they create fixed capital, since this results in an increase of private fortunes. They therefore do all they can to prevent the inflation from increasing the profits of industrialists. More especially, they clamp down on industrial prices, which are also, from administrative point of view, the easiest prices to control, since it is the industrialist class which saves most. The result is to exacerbate the inflation. It would be much sounder to pursue policies which would result in the profit of industrialists rising more rapidly than other incomes, and then to tax these profits away, either immediately or at death. Inflation continues to be generated so long as the community is not willing to hold an amount equal to the increased investment expenditure. It is not, therefore, enough that savings should increase to this extent, for if these savings are used for additional investment, the initial gap still remains. The gap is closed only if the savings are hoarded or used to buy government bonds, so that the government can now finance its investments by borrowing instead of by creating new money. Hence, in practice, if the government wishes the inflation to be ended without reducing its investment, it must find means of bringing into its coffers as much in taxes or in loans as it is spending. If it is failing to do this, the inflation will continue. It is then better that it should continue because capitalists are spending their profits on further capital formation than because other classes are chasing a limited output of consumer goods. But if it is desired to end inflation as soon as possible, all classes should be encouraged to invest in government bonds rather than to spend in other ways. Finally, we come to the relation between capital and output. If the intention is to finance capital formation by creating credit, the best objects for such a policy are those which yield a large income quickly. To finance school building by creating credit is asking for trouble. On the other hand, there are a lot of agriculture programs, water supplies, fertilizers, and seed farms extensions, where quick and substantial results may be expected from modest expenditure. If there are idle resources available for capital formation, it is foolish not to use them simply because of technical or political difficulties in raising taxes. But it would be equally foolish to use them on programs which take a long time to give a small result, when there are others which could give a large result quickly. We may sum up as follows. If labor is abundant and physical resources scarce, the primary effect on output is exactly the same whether the government creates capital out of taxation or out of credit creation. The output of consumer goods is unchanged, but is redistributed. Hence, credit creation must be seen primarily as an alternative to its taxation, which is worth the trouble it brings only if trying to raise taxes would bring even more troubles. Credit creation has, however, one further lead upon taxation in that if it also redistributes income towards the industrial class. If there is an industrial class, it will speed up capital formation out of profits. If it is impossible to increase taxation, and the alternative is between creating capital out of credit and not creating it at all, the choice one has then to make is between stable prices or rising output. There is no simple formula for making this choice. In some communities, any further inflation of prices would ruin their fragile social or political equilibrium. In others, this equilibrium will be destroyed if there is not a sharp increase in output in the near future, and in still others, the equilibrium will be ruined either way. We may now resume our analysis. We have seen that if unlimited labor is available at a constant real wage, the capitalist surplus will rise continuously, and annual investment will be a rising proportion of the national income. Needless to say, this cannot go on forever. The process must stop when capital accumulation has caught up with population, so that there is no longer surplus labor. But it may stop before that. It may stop, of course, for any number of reasons which are outside our system of analysis, ranging from earthquake or bubonic plague to social revolution. But it may also stop for the economic reason that although there is a labor surplus, real wages may nevertheless rise so high as to reduce capitalist profits to the level at which profits are all consumed and there is no net investment. This may happen for one of four reasons. First, if capital accumulation is proceeding faster than population growth and is therefore reducing absolutely the number of people in the subsistence sector, the average product per man in that sector rises automatically, not because production alters, but because there are fewer mouths to share the product. After a while, the change actually becomes noticeable, and the capitalist wage begins to be forced up. Secondly, the increase in the size of the capitalist sector relatively to the subsistence sector may turn the terms of trade against the capitalist sector if they are producing different things, and so force the capitalist to pay workers a higher percentage of their product in order to keep their real income constant. Thirdly, the subsistence sector may also become more productive in the technical sense. For example, it may begin to imitate the techniques of the capitalist sector. The peasants may get hold of some of the new seeds or hear about the new fertilizers or rotations. They may also benefit directly from some of the capitalist investments, e.g. in irrigation works, in transport facilities, or in electricity, anything which raises the productivity of the subsistence sector. Average person will raise real wages in the capitalist sector and will therefore reduce the capitalist surplus and the rate of capital accumulation, unless it at the same time more than correspondingly moves the terms of the trade against the subsistence sector. Alternatively, even if the productivity of the capitalist sector is unchanged, the workers in the capitalist sector may imitate the capitalist way of life and may thus need more to live on. the subsistence level is only a conventional idea, and conventions change. The effect of this would be to widen the gap between earnings in the subsistence sector and wages in the capitalist sector. This is hard to do if labor is abundant, but it may be achieved by a combination of trade union pressure and capitalist conscience. If it is achieved, it will reduce the capitalist surplus and also the rate of capital accumulation. The most interesting of these possibilities is that the terms of trade may move against the capitalist sector. This assumes that the capitalist and the subsistence sector are producing different things. In practice, this is a question of the relationship between industry and agriculture. If the capitalists are investing in plantation agriculture side by side with their investment in industry, we can think of the capitalist sector as a self-contained. The expansion of this sector does not then generate any demand for anything produced in the subsistence sector, and there are therefore no terms of trade to upset the picture we have drawn. To bring this term of trade in, the simplest assumption to make is that the subsistence sector consists of peasants producing food, while the capitalist sector produces everything else. Now, if the capitalist sector produces no food, its expansion increases the demand for food, raises the price of food in terms of capitalist products, and so reduces profits. This is one of the senses in which industrialization is dependent upon agricultural improvement. It is not profitable to produce a growing volume of manufacturers unless agricultural production is growing simultaneously. This is also why industrial and agrarian revolutions always go together, and why economies in which agriculture is stagnant do not show industrial development. Hence, if we postulate that the capitalist sector is not producing food, we must either postulate that the subsistence sector is increasing its output, or else conclude that the expansion of the capitalist sector will be brought to an end through adverse terms of trade eating into profits. Ricardo's problem of increasing rents is first cousin to this conclusion. He worried about rents increasing inside the capitalist sector, whereas we are dealing with rents outside the sector. On the other hand, if we assume that the subsistence sector is producing more food while we escape the scylla of adverse terms of trade, we may be caught by the charybdis of real wages rising because the subsistence sector is more productive. We escape both scylla and charybdis if rising productivity in the subsistence sector is more than offset by improving terms of trade. However, if the subsistence sector is producing food, the elasticity of demand for which is less than unity increases in productivity will be more than offset by reduction in price. A rise in the productivity of the subsistence sector hurts the capitalist sector if there is no trade between the two, or if the demand of the capitalist sector for the subsistence sector's product is elastic. On the assumptions we have made, a rise in food productivity benefits the capitalist sector. Nevertheless, when we take rising demand into account, it is not at all unlikely that the price of food will not fall as fast as productivity increases, and this will force the capitalist to pay out a larger part of their product as wages. If there is no hope of prices falling as fast as productivity increases because demand is increasing, the capitalist's the next best move is to prevent the farmer from getting all his extra production. In Japan, this was achieved by raising rents against the farmers and by taxing them more heavily so that a large a large part of the rapid increase in productivity which occurred between 1880 and 1910, it doubled, was taken away from the farmers and used for capital formation. At the same time, holding down of the farmer's income itself held down wages to the advantage of profits in the capitalist sector. Much of the same happened in the USSR, where farm incomes per head were held down, in spite of farm mechanization and the considerable release of labor to the towns. This was done jointly by raising the prices of manufactures relative to farm products and also by levying heavy taxes upon the collective farms. This also defines for us the case in which it is true to say that it is agriculture which finances industrialization. If the capitalist sector is self-contained, its expansion is in no way dependent upon the peasants. The surplus is wholly at the expense of the workers in the capitalist sector. But if the capitalist sector depends upon the peasants for food, it is essential to get the peasants to produce more, while if at the same time they can be prevented from enjoying the full fruit of their extra production, wages can be reduced relatively to the capitalist surplus. By contrast, a state which is ruled by peasants may be happy and prosperous, but it is not likely to show such a rapid accumulation of capital. E.g., will China and the USSR diverge in this respect? We conclude, therefore, that the expansion of the capitalist sector may be stopped because the price of subsistence goods rises, or because the price is not falling as fast as subsistence productivity per head is rising, or because capitalist workers raise their standard of what they need for subsistence. Any of these would raise wages relatively to the surplus. If none of the processes is enough to stop capital accumulation, the capitalist sector will continue to expand until there is no surplus labor left. This can happen even if population is growing. For example, if it takes 3% of annual income invested to employ 1% more people, an annual net investment of 12% can cope with as much as a 4% increase in population. But population in Western Europe at the relevant times grew only by 1% or so per annum, which is also the present rate of growth in India, and rates of growth exceeding 2.5% per annum are even now rather rare. We cannot say that capital will always grow faster than labor. It obviously has not done so in Asia, but we can say that if conditions are favorable for the capitalist surplus to grow more rapidly than population, there must come a day when capital accumulation has caught up with labor supply. Ricardo and Malthus did not provide for this in their models because they overestimated the rate of growth of population. Marx did not provide for it either because he had persuaded himself that capital accumulation increases unemployment. instead of reducing it. He has a curious model in which the short-run effect of accumulation is to reduce unemployment, raise wages, and thus provoke a crisis, while the long-run effect is to increase the reserve army of unemployed. Of the classical economists, only Adam Smith saw clearly that capital accumulation would eventually create a shortage of labor and raise wages above the subsistence level. When the labor surplus disappears, our model of closed economy no longer holds. Wages are no longer tied to a subsistence level. Adam Smith thought they would then depend upon the degree of monopoly, a doctrine which was represented in the 1930s as one of the novelties of modern economic analysis. The neoclassicists invented the doctrine of marginal productivity. The problem is not yet solved to everyone's satisfaction, except in static models which take no account of capital accumulation and of technical progress. It is, however, outside the terms of reference of this essay, and we will not pursue it here. Our task is not, however, finished. In the classical world, all countries have surplus labor. In the neoclassical world, labor is scarce in all countries. In the real world, however, countries which achieve labor scarcity continue to be surrounded by others which have abundant labor. Instead of concentrating on one country and examining the expansion of its capitalist sector, we now have to see this country as a part of the expanding capitalist sector of the world economy as a whole, and to inquire how the distribution of income inside the country and its rate of capital accumulation are affected by the fact that there is abundant labor available elsewhere at a subsistence wage.